the wit of policymakers to design something that could attract competent people.
I saw someone in the back a minute ago. Did you disappear? Oh, there you are. Go ahead. Identify yourself.
My name is Simon Milnes, and my question is for the panel. What kind of conversations have you had with the incoming administration and particularly the new SEC chair, Mary Shapiro, and also conversations with Congress around these issues, and what's your judgment as to the level of political willingness by the administration and Congress to attack these issues as you prescribe?
Damon, that sounds like it's to you first.
All right.
If you dare.
Well, there are distinct limits to the kinds of conversations that have occurred that are kind of structural, right? As Barack Obama has said, I think rather pointedly, there's only one government at a time in the United States. And Barney Frank said, well, then we're one down, which I thought was pretty witty. You're going to get a kind of strange answer out of me on this, Simon. But so there are real limits to the kinds of conversations that can be had with the transition team, and I think those limits are appropriate. I can tell you that the AFL-CIO and the broader labor movement, and I think a number of people representing investors, have certainly expressed our views to them. The economic team, obviously, as Bob said a few minutes ago, involves some people with some histories of their own and some ideas of their own at various times, not all of which are the same on any given moment for any. Not all of which have been the same over time, right? And then you have some people who are changing roles, right, and changing authority. I think that one of the key issues, one of the key things about Mary Shapiro is that she's moving potentially from the kind of self-regulatory role that Bob described to the position at the top of the chain, and those are real different positions. I also want to say something about the notion that there is no government at all right now. And I think you'll be quite surprised at what I'm going to say. I think that the country owes a true debt to Hank Paulson. And the reason we do is because there was a government during the last 4 or 5 months, and he was it. Right? And that the alternative, that there had been none, right, was present and immediate. Right? And that is not to be underestimated as a fact about our country in the last 6 months. And I think that, I am a signer on a document that I think some have interpreted as being quite critical of Treasury's handling of TARP. And I'm telling you that I feel very strongly about what I just said. Now, what does that mean about now? So let me then come back around to the question of the administration and the Congress. And I will say something again, kind of broad and general. Just because deregulatory policies have failed, and just because our economy is in terrible trouble, and the more you know, the more informed you are about the inner workings of our economy, the closer you are to key financial mechanisms, in my experience, the more worried you are. Right? It's sort of the opposite of what you usually find. Right? Usually people who don't know very much think that the world's about to end, and people who know a lot are calm. It's the opposite right now, and it's been that way for a while. Despite all of that, there's just no guarantee that wise public policy choices will be made. There are, and just because someone says to you, "Oh, we intend to re-regulate," or we intend to have 21st century regulation, which will solve all these problems, doesn't mean that, in fact, we will actually, as a nation, make it worse. Now, and I want to then finally just say this. How bad is the problem? Well, you can measure the problem in terms of the immediate crisis of the credit markets. Very real, very serious crisis. There have been some liberal commentators who suggested that there isn't a crisis in the credit markets. I think there's a Fed study from one of the regional Feds that looks at some lending data. I don't buy that in the slightest. I talk to too many people. I know too many situations. There is a building there's a hole at 17th and Connecticut, right? Those of you who live in Washington I think are aware that 17th and Connecticut is by some measures the most valuable piece of property in the city. Right? It's right at the Farragut North Metro stop. It's the most prominent piece of property on K Street. There's a hole there. Right? That site is fully leased. There are people who want to put their offices where that hole is. Right? There's no money. That hole's been sitting there for 6 months. And my understanding is that the people who own that property are contemplating filling it in with sand and paving it. Okay? That's the kind of thing that tells you that this is for real. Okay? Now, but that kind of thing, right? That kind of shocking thing is really not what we ought to be completely focused on. Here are the numbers we ought to be focused on. There are two numbers that I think there are many very powerful numbers, but here are two. In 2006, 40% of the corporate profits of the S&P 500 came from the financial sector. That is a statement of profound long-term crisis. Secondly, for the last summer, before the stock market crashed, when the stock market was at what people thought was fairly high level, the long-term rate of return in our equities markets, the 10-year rate of return, was 6%. Now today, that sounds fabulous. That sounds like, show me where I can get that. Right? Because, of course, that market, those values have now fallen by 40% from what they were last summer. But that long-term rate of 6% is half the 20th century average, which tells us that during the deregulatory era, during the era where immense fortunes were made in financial activity, the underlying profitability of American business, large-scale American business, as measured in the manner that more conservative people would ask us to measure it, stock market return, right, is half what it should be. And those numbers tell us we're doing something wrong.